Welcome to this video on the topic of Year 7 Statistical Mathematics, drawing scatter plots. In this lesson, you'll learn how to compare two datasets visually using something called a scatter plot. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to name the key features that make up a scatter plot. You'll be able to draw a scatter plot, and finally, you'll be able to interpret statistical information from a scatter plot. Part 1. Preparing the data. Some datasets can contain more than one measurement of data for the subject at hand. Consider dataset 1 here. Dataset 1 represents the average monthly temperatures. We had 30 degrees, 27 degrees, 24 degrees, and 21 degrees. Consider dataset 2. Dataset 2 represents the monthly ice cream sales. $610, $550, $490, $400, and so on. Now, looking at these two datasets, we might not think that there's any particular relation that would link them together. However, upon closer inspection, we can observe that they're linked by month. So in the month of January, there was an average temperature of 30 degrees, and during the month of January, there was also $610 worth of ice cream sales. What our job here is to do is we want to see if there's some form of relationship that links these datasets together. So does a change in temperature affect the ice cream sales of a particular month? Now, to do this, we must first tabulate our data. So we've got our two datasets over here. What we want to do is we want to organize them in such a way that we can see which data point is linked to the other data point. The way in which we do this is we'll build a table of data. To start off, the first step we do is we have to give a label to the table that we're building. So in this case, I'll call it temperature versus ice cream sales. In the second step, we simply write out the temperature and the sales, setting up for some columns. So this will be a column here and this will be a column here. After that, I underline. In the next step, I then start listing the data. As you can see on the left here, I've listed the temperature. I've made careful note to write the numbers within the boxes. Reason for this is it keeps it nice and neat. Now the next step is I need to put in the sales data on the other side for that column. Notice how I've got it in a regular and repeating manner. Reason for this is one column, this is another column. To finish off the table, we rule a vertical line to separate the columns. The reason why we leave this step until last is because it allows us to see how far we should rule down. So you can do this first, but you'll have to count in advance. Okay, so this is building the table. In our next step, we want to visualize the data. Now, to understand where we're going, let's first have a look at some reference scatter plots. Now, a scatter plot is a type of graph where we've got an axis going up on the left and an axis going up on the right. Inside, we have dots all around. Depending on how many data points will depend on how many dots we have in here. Now, what you can see is that with scatter plots, the arrangement of the dots is going to reveal information about the relationship between the data. So this is what we want to build. Alright, let's get started. To begin creating a scatter plot, the first thing we need to do is we need to rule out our horizontal axis. To do this, I get my ruler and I'm going to align it at the bottom of the page towards the grid. This will ensure that I've got enough space going upwards to fit all of my scatter plot data in. Now, to decide how far the axis should be ruled across on the page, I need to observe the first column in my table. So I can see that the data points, the lowest one in there is 12 and the highest one in there is 30. Now, because this is temperature, I think what I'll do is I'll start the scatter plot on the horizontal axis at 0 and I'm going to rule it up to at least 30. Now, doing this, I'm going to count out the squares. So I'll start over here and I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15, 30, and then I'll just take it up to 32. Alright, so that's almost first step done. Now, next bit is I'm going to start putting out some notches so I know where the data is. 5, 10, 30. So I've gone up to 33 on this. And then to finish off the axis, I'm going to draw an arrowhead. This denotes that the axis doesn't necessarily finish there, so there could be more numbers over to the right. Next step is I need to put in the numbers. So we've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Okay, and then the final thing we should add to this is the title for the axis. So this on our bottom, or our horizontal, is our temperature. Notice how I'm putting in the units on the side here as well. This is to show the user or the reader what units we're working in. Okay, next step is we need to do the vertical axis. Once again, I'm going to get my ruler and I'm going to align it so it's vertical. Holding this steady on my page, I align it like so. Now, what I now turn my attention to is not the left column, but the right column. The numbers in this column are quite large. The numbers in this column, they go from a low of 200 all the way up to 610. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start this at we'll say 0, and I'm going to take it up to just a bit above 600. Now I'm not sure how I should space this, so I'm just going to play a bit to begin with. So I'll start off over here and I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, putting my ruler away. And what you can see is that, well, it's probably not the best way to space it because it's so short in the vertical direction. Rather, we want to use our space. So let's try that again. Carefully lining it to the grid. And then going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's a little bit better. I've double spaced it, so it's 100, 200, 300. But again, we can go better than that. We can use our space up. So let's try one more time. We will triple space every 100. So we'll go 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. And then just above 600, we'll go up to here. Alright, so this is our vertical. Labeling it, I put in my notches, and now I place the numbers. All the way up to 600. Perfect. Finalizing this axis, I'm now going to give it its label. So this is not frequency, it is sales. And the units are dollars. Alright, so we're almost done. Now our next step is we need to give the title itself to the particular graph. So for this graph, we're going to call it temperature versus ice cream sales. I'm ready to start putting in the data now. To begin, what I first need to do is I need to first focus on the first data point, that being 30 and 610. Now to put this in, what I first do is I locate 30 on my temperature scale, or my horizontal axis. This is over. What I do is I get my ruler and I line it up on 30. Then using a very faint line, I'm going to rule down. This is going to be a guideline to help me identify the point. Now, lining my ruler vertically, horizontally I should say, I look for 610 on my vertical axis. I locate 600, but what I can see is I don't actually have a notch on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to estimate. So looking at this, it's triple spaced. So between 1.5 squares, that's 450 there. And then 430 would be around here. So therefore 410 must be somewhere in there. And therefore 610 should be somewhere around here. Thus, I line it up and I draw a guideline across. Once they touch, I can stop ruling because I know I've found my point. Now to add the point in, I simply either do a circle, I can do a dot, or my favorite way to do it is I say X marks the spot. And this is my first data point. Now I can get rid of my faint lines if I have a rubber, and I can move to the next data point. Next data point being 27 and 550. To do this, I repeat the process. I identify 27, I rule a faint line upwards, and then I look for 550 on my axis. 500 is here, 600 is here. Between the two, I must find 500. marking the data. X marks the spot. I now have 2 points. I'm going to go for a third. 400 and 500. 450 is here. 470 is here. So 490 must be around here. Thus, I complete putting all of the data points on my graph. So what we have over here is what we call a scatter plot. Moving on, part 3, understanding the data. Now, the whole purpose of drawing a scatter plot is to be able to identify whether there is any relationship between the two data points that we graph against one another. In this case, the ice cream sales against the temperature. Now, to be able to understand this, we're looking for general shapes we can see in the data. Now, looking at this one, what we can see is that the data itself, it seems to be going from the bottom left of the graph and trending upwards to the top right of the graph. What we can see from this is that the points are arranged in a regular and repeatable pattern. Analyzing this a bit further, what we can see is that we could sort of visualize the points as forming a line, and it's pointing in an upwardly, so right upwardly manner. This is suggestive that as the sales go up, temperature also goes up, and therefore what we can conclude is that there is indeed a relationship between ice cream sales and average monthly temperature. It could be seen that as the average monthly temperature increases, so do the sales amount. So these are 2 examples of how you could write this in English. Part 4, other interpretations. Now, on top of being able to understand the particular graph that we were looking at, there's also other graphs. So the trend that we saw in our example was something called a positive relationship. What this means is that as the value of X increases, the value of Y also increases. So as the value on this horizontal here goes across, the value of Y starts to go upwards. So this is low and it's trending up. Now, conversely, there's another trend we call a negative trend. This is such that as the value of X increases, the value of Y decreases. Or, as we move from the left over to the right, up here, the points that we're putting on start going lower on the graph. So this is a negative relationship. If this was seen in our example, we'd see that as the temperature went up, the amount of ice cream sales would go down, but that doesn't make much sense. Now, the other sort of relationship that we could see is that of no relationship. So that's when the data is put all over the graph. So what we can see from this one is that the 2 data points that we're comparing to one another, they're independent of one another, so they have no effect on each other. So these are 3 different relationships that you could pull when doing a scatter plot. So in summary, what we had a look at in this lesson was how we could compare 2 data sets visually using something called a scatter plot. By now, you should be able to name the key features that make up a scatter plot, you should be able to draw a scatter plot, and you should be able to interpret statistical information from a scatter plot.